Good morning, everyone. Um, Yesterday we talked about quite a few things, and I want to ask if we primarily focused on feminine energy and balance, and how the feminine energy is going to reveal itself regardless of what it takes. So I want to ask if there are questions as it pertains to what has, excuse me, what we have discussed yesterday or any time in the past, or uh, are there any questions about any of your encounters or something that you've read or something that you've spoken with or someone has spoke with you about? So if you have any questions pertaining to anything, would you raise them now?
Good morning.
Good morning. Is there a question? Okay. If
Pastor,
there,
I sent you a text. I had this dream, and it primarily involved a church in California, but it might be something for us to talk about. I didn't know if maybe I could share that.
yes, I saw your text when I got up this morning.
Okay. Yeah, so I thought it was interesting because some of the symbols in it. In the dream, the pastor of that church, it was like we were at service in the sanctuary there, and but he was up on a ladder because it's a tall sanctuary, and he was working. He was physically, doing some work, and his mother, who's also a pastor, is on the calls. Said, "I want you to that you need to paint that spot right there." And what it looked like was the ceiling was white, but the place behind the altar was painted blue, in front of the church. But it looked like some of the white paint from the ceiling had gotten down on the blue of the painted part, and he was painting over the white with beige or brown, or not white. So he was like painting over the white parts with a color, a light, like a beigey whatever color. And I could see there were splotches of this beigey, like a human colored color all over the backdrop, like they were painting over the white to at least show, or within the blue, there were these colors. And that was the first part of the dream. Then it shifted, and there were all these people of color in the church. And this church is primarily white or Asian, but mostly white. And there were all these people of color now, from Africa, from Latin America in the church, and it was full because this church is pretty small. But the people in the church who were in the church now, the pews were facing towards the center of the church, so everyone along the church was looking at each other, not at the front of the church. And I also saw that there was some new construction in the church, only on one side of the church's windows. And it was a new construction on that side of the church to cover the windows. So light wasn't being allowed to come into the church anymore. But it hadn't been painted over yet. It was like, drywall that had been plastered but not painted. And no light was coming into the church anymore because of the new construction and all these people. And they all sat there like no one was talking. They were almost like zombies, just sitting there facing towards the center of the church, packed full, but just looking at each other. And then someone who was not the pastor who currently is was now the pastor of this church, and he was fiery brimstone kind of preacher. And I was talking to somebody nearby me who had been there before, and I said, I don't like this guy. I want to leave. I'm ready to go. And I wanted to leave the church, and the doors were barred, and I couldn't get out. And that was the end of the dream.
What is your understanding of the dream, your interpretation of it?
So for me, part of what I'm seeing with all the work, the very first part where the pastor's doing all this work, and I did talk to him about this dream, by the way, was that all that work was still painting over something. You know, they were trying to paint over the white. So was it more than surface deep was the question that came to mind. And I don't think it's for lack of trying on their part. It's just the impact maybe. But, and it's also, I think, tied to this book we've been reading about, Do I Stay Christian and all. But the painting over it felt like it was a lot of work, and they were really trying hard to cover, you know, to cover up or to, you know, get rid of that white that was part of the church and bring in more color, bring in more depth. And then this other part, I think, was from the book where it talks about church attendance is dropping in the US and in Europe, and has for years, decades, but it's growing in Latin America and Africa, and that's where the church, the Christian church as we know it, is growing. However, the message of the church hasn't changed. So even though you have these big congregations, they still aren't being fed. You know, it's almost like they're still dead. And then the new construction on the side of the church, I thought it was to freshen up the church and make it look new, but they were blocking out the light to do that. So it's like you created this new area, but with less light and less truth. But the hardest part of the dream for me was that I decided to leave and was being barred from leaving. Like they were barring the doors, so I couldn't leave. I had to stay there in that, you know, in that place. And the people who were there were now barred from leaving. And I don't know if that's a move that people want for Christianity, which, you know, is more cultish, you know, because in a cult you can't leave. You got to stay. You're barred. So that's just the stuff that appeared to me from the dream, but that's all I had.
Is there anyone who would like to comment on that? Okay. I agree with you, because when you were speaking, especially when you talked about the painting over of the white, is blocking out the light. And I agree that the church is trying to present itself in a different way. And as far as your being barred, the doors being barred and you not leaving, being able to leave, I see that as the guilt that people who want to leave are attacked with. This is your home church. This is where your grandparents grew up. They are the ones who built this place, and you're going to walk away from all that kind of thing. So I actually see it as being representative or symbolic of where we are and how we are viewing the church itself. Keep in mind, for the last couple of weeks, we have been talking about the reality of what church means versus the assembling of ourselves together. And what we've seen is that the church is an entrapment more than a place for spiritual growth. So I concur with your interpretation of that dream. And I would like to see if there are anyone else, if there's anyone else who sees something differently or would like to expand on what has already been said.
Pastor or Rainier, this is Richard. Just quickly, what came to me immediately, in my experience and sense, most of what comes in your dreams is about you and what you're perceiving. So part of it could be, which is normal, because you learn this attachment so early in life, that it's really, it may be the church trying to impose that, the idea of leaving, but it may also be a vestige of a difficulty that you feel to let go. And that's okay to me because of all the years, the experiences, family, etc., associated with that. It's a big thing. But that would be my sense.
Ray,
Yeah,
and
I can see that. I can see that too, that idea of wanting to leave, but how do you leave kind of thing, or, yeah.
Good morning,
Um,
this is Audrey. I see it as the church itself right now, because they're losing so many people. They're doing everything they can to get those people of color in there. But yes, they're teaching the same old message that's kind of entrapping, enslaving, whatever word you want to use. But that's what I see. It's the same old, same old. They're doing everything they can to get the new and different people in the church to supplant the ones that are leaving. And then, but the message is the same. It's the same old entrapment.
Thank you.
I get, if I can add one other quick question, Raina, I just got on, so I don't know. So I apologize if this has already been expressed. Have you shared this with your pastor? I just wonder.
Yeah, I told him, I said I'd share it with Pastor Richard, but not to everybody, but yes, I did talk to him about it.
I mean, your pastor there in California.
Yes, no, yeah, I told him first.
Okay, okay, good. So my sense is good. Okay. I don't know what his reaction was, but the fact that you shared that, I think was an important thing for you. Okay.
Anyone else? Thank you, Richard.
Good morning, Pastor. Good morning, everyone. Again, I just say to Rania, I mean, in your dream, you encountered this, but I can only contest to my own personal experience, being, of the United Methodism denomination, that I, needed to make a decision to leave. And I, too, went through the process of communicating with those that I needed to. And at the same time, it did, cause, just some reflection and meditation in terms of just where I am, because my family is still at that, still at that church where I am not. And so, there's, that relationship, that, out of love for our family, is always going to be there. But it's just one of those situations that it really, had me to do some reflections, and I'm just at peace, and I'm blessed to be where I'm at today, and to know that, again, it's just something that not everyone may go through, but I have. And so I kind of, sense your intuitions in terms of things that you may be going through. So I just wanted to, let you know that I appreciate, what you're bringing forth in your dream. And I too got on a little bit late, but hopefully it resonates a little bit. I'm done.
Thank you, sir. Are there any other comments?
I
Good
have
morning.
a
This
question.
is Kathy.
Oh, sorry, go
sorry.
ahead, Kathy.
Okay, I just had one quick question, observation, and I guess it's part a question and an observation. We were talking a few weeks ago about the church and religion being in a circle, being like a circle. And I thought it was interesting that when she looks at the people in the second half of the dream, everyone is facing one another in a circle. And what I was going to ask you, pastors, will you refresh my memory about what we said about religion and the church and everything being circular? And this, do you recall what I'm asking? Do you remember that conversation that we had about a week or 2 weeks ago? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I do. The statement I made in regards to church is that the origin of the word is Latin, and it comes from a word it comes from a word in Latin that circa, meaning circle. to do the same thing over and over again. And that word was brought into the religious environment by the Catholics. Catholicism, the Catholics are the ones who introduced that word church. And it is a very poor translation, even of the Greek ecclesia, and definitely a non-existent interpretation of what church means, of what the assemblage means in the Aramaic or the Hebrew. So understanding that, we see that everything that is done in the church is done every single year the same way. The revivals, the Sunday school books are every 5 years. Morning quote unquote worship, the delivery of a message that has no opportunity to be questioned or amplified through questioning. The Wednesday night services that do not offer anything at all. You ask a question and you're told 9 times out of 10 that we are not supposed to understand everything. And everything that I have said, regardless of denomination, every one of you have heard it before, have experienced it before. That's the circle. However, when we are discussing and have been for quite a few years, the essence of what's being said in the scriptures, we are always moving forward because we always see more than what we saw previously. And that is a progression of understanding of the wisdom that is presented to us by our Creator, as opposed to a circular action that just that continues along the same pathway and only repeats itself as opposed to expanding itself. Does that help you, Kat?
It does, because what that says to me is that portion of the dream was revealing that here we are mired down in religion, and religion doesn't want us, the church as we know it, who is steeped in religion, doesn't want us to leave. It wants to keep you in that place, finding your, because what we've often talked about in the circle, you find support and companionship and unity and acceptance in that circle, and that's what will keep you in that circle, finding those things. And so I just thought that was a very interesting part of the dream, that now everybody's in the quote unquote unity circle. And I just wanted you to bring up those things about the circle again, because I think it brings even more clarity. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Is
You
there
know, I was
anyone?
going to say too about that, Pastor, the circles of them facing each other, is that they could only see each other. I was standing behind them. So that meant that you only saw people who were part of your group, right? Because you were only looking towards the center and not outward from it. And I thought that was odd, because how do you then share anything with the world if your world is only these people who you're facing, who are all facing you, you know, in this closed loop kind of thing.
Yes.
But yeah. But the question I would have is, you know, are we Christian? You know, are we part of Christianity? I'm curious how this, you know, how folks on this call feel, and what does that mean to be part of that or not?
Rainier, honestly, no. And the reason I say no is because Christianity is a label that was made up by Catholicism and is based on Christ. Christians use Christ as though it is Jesus' last name. It is not his surname. The other thing about that is this: if you are a Christian, that means that you are messianic. You are a Messiah. And if you go into any Christian church and tell them that you are messianic, they will argue with you, if not have you removed from the premises. So that in itself is a misnomer. It is a non-existent entity, or non-existent philosophy, non-existent whatever you want to call it. Christianity does not exist in reality, because the very people who fight for you to believe in Christianity, for you to embrace Christianity, who proclaim themselves as Christians, do not believe that they are, because they don't believe that they are a Messiah. That's not rhetorical. Does that make sense? Can you see what I make the point I'm?
Sage, you blanked out on the last part.
Which part?
When you said most church individuals do not believe they are messianic.
Right. They don't believe that they're messianic. And because they don't believe that they're messianic, they can't possibly believe that they are Christians, because that's the origin of the word. Christ, or Christos in the Greek, Meshach in the Hebrew, which means Messiah. So have you ever heard anyone standing in that pulpit and tell you that they are Messiah? Excluding me, of course. Is that clear? Or does that make sense to you?
It does to me, yeah.
It does.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Pastor.
Morning, this is
I'm sorry. I yield.
Oh, thank you. This is Denise. I was just going to say, in terms of the Christian label, I have trouble using it because I feel like it communicates something about my spirituality to other people that is not true. But that was the only comment that I had.
Thanks. And I see that, and I embrace the same thing. Was that you, Evelyn?
Yes, sir. Now that I've learned that we're concepts, I did not realize the stronghold that concepts have. Am I correct with that?
No, we are not a concept. We are every concept. We are Elohim. And the concepts of Christianity separates us from embracing the reality of who we are. Spirituality, if you follow the understandings of the holy books, what you will see is the concepts show us who we are. And when we use the word concepts in regards to different groups of people, we are talking about overall experiences as opposed to individual people or individual subsets of those people. For example, when we talk about the African experience, the European experience, we are talking about a conceptual experience that applies to the overwhelming majority of the people in that group. The concept speaks to the guiding forces in their systems of beliefs. Our idioms are different, but our goals are supposed to be the same. Even though our idioms are different, our goal is supposed to be to embrace in total the essence of who we were created to be. So we are more than a concept. We are everything, conceptually and otherwise, because we are Elohim. Does that make sense to you, Miss Evelyn?
It does, but can you explain what an idiom is, please?
What an idiom is, you worry me to death. If you say that in a group setting of people from another country, they won't know what you're talking about. 9 times out of 10, what are you talking about? Or if you say, you get on my nerves, what does that mean to someone who is not familiar with that idiom or that way of thinking? And also, there are different concepts that are idiomatic as well. A sundown town. What is a sundown town? Some of the people on this phone don't even know what that means because it is mostly a generational concept or idiom. And that means a sundown town is that every Black person in that town better be off the streets by the time the sun go down or be out of town. That's a sundown town. So those are the types of things, Evelyn, that are idiomatic or sayings within the confines of a group of people. And none of them are right or wrong. They are simply a way of communicating. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome, ma'am. Anyone else? Okay, when Rania introduced us to her dream, one first thing she spoke of was a ladder. And I kind of smiled. And the reason is because one of the things I wanted to explore today is what does it mean for Jacob to become Israel, and how does it apply to us today? And I have been debating as to whether or not I would speak in reference to the angels ascending and descending the ladder and what all of that means. However, I do want to raise the question and see if there is anyone who has any ideal of what we're talking about, when what the scriptures are talking about, rather, when it speaks of Jacob, the name being changed to Israel. Before I enter, hopefully, an explanation or understanding of that, I would like to see if anyone else has any idea of what it means to them. Don't all speak at one time.
About the name change?
Yeah, what does it mean? The name change, what does that mean? Not only then when it was changed, but how is it applicable to us now?
I don't know that I can speak to all that, but I do know that in
That's okay. Speak to what.
I do know that in Jewish, well, in the tradition, in the religious tradition, and in their cultural tradition, names mean a lot, and names kind of determine your character. And sometimes, and in some traditions, when something is not going well for somebody, or they just can't seem to get themselves together, or they can't move out of the place they're stuck in, sometimes they will have a ceremony to change their name, because the name has so much influence on who you are in this particular life. So with Jacob's name being changed, And even then with Jacob and Esau, there were, didn't they have a special consideration for what they were going to name them?
Yes, they did.
Anyway, so with his name being changed, it meant he could then kind of go a different direction than his original name would have, a different trajectory than his original name would have taken him. That's all I know.
Thank you, ma'am.
Can I add something to what was just said? It's something that just happened. In my youngest son's class, they're doing the Native American thing. They're allowing the kids to kind of say, you have a name, find out from your parents what it means, and then if you were to create your own name, what would it be? And Joshie didn't know what his name meant, and he assumed it meant stuff like destroyer, or these verbs that are I'm tearing things up, I'm bad, and when I told him his name was my God is salvation, and his middle name is protector or advisor, he runs away going, I'm a warrior. So it is interesting too not to know what your name means, what it does, right? Like that he had internalized that he was bad because of his actions instead of what his name was. But that's all I had.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Anyone else?
This is Vermel. I don't know if Audrey already said this, but in some societies, isn't it when your name is changed, you move from one belief to another?
When your name is changed, and you do, but not in terms of a belief from, say, Christianity to spiritualism. It changes your character. As Audrey described, the foundational meaning of name change in the culture of Judaism. And it is, if you are dwelling on something that happened to you that was an adversity and you can't move past it, then your name is changed to something else that will guide you along the pathway to free you from what you are trapped in. So names are very, very powerful, have very, very powerful meanings and in the in other cultures. For example, Eastern cultures don't name you arbitrarily. Eastern cultures, as Audrey pointed out with the Judaism, your name is given great consideration, and your name is also based upon, in many, many cases, the time of the year, the date that you were born, whether it was day or night, what was going on when you were born. So names, the consideration of names are given so that it would be reflective of your character. And it is my belief that no one's name is given to them as arbitrarily as we think they are given. I do believe that there are influences from the universe that guides us along the pathway of making application of names to our children, because they do indeed, in many, many cases, become reflective of the character that those names represent. And the character that those names represent can be on either side of the spectrum. It can be righteousness or it can be unrighteousness. It is a choice that of the pathway that we choose to follow. Does that make sense? Hello?
I think we lost you.
I said that the character of the names, did you hear that part of it?
Yes. Just lost you on the
Okay.
end.
And okay, what's the last thing you heard?
I heard you say, does that make sense? And I would say, yes, it does.
Okay, so you heard what I was saying then. Anyway, the basic of what I was saying is that we made choices. Even though the name represents character, that character is reflective in our lives based upon the name we receive. It is not just arbitrarily given as we think. And on either side of the spectrum, that name can be realized. It can be realized on the sides of the spectrum that create adversity for those who come in contact with you, or your experience with other people. That character can be reflected in to uplift other people, or to be some type of foundational support for those who surround you. So names are extremely important, and there are multiplicity of ways, multiplicity of things rather, that influences what your name is. Does that help?
Yes. Pastor, I have a question. You know, in the book of Exodus, when Moses, was talking to God, and I believe, in the scripture it says that I, shall give you a name, a memorial, and he spoke in the reference of the I am statement. When you talk about, the power of names, would that be some sort of comparison in terms of when we talk about reverencing, God, or referencing Elohim, that it has that connectedness in terms of the power of who we say we are? I know, again, there's no stupid question and no stupid answer, but I think that sometimes when I write, or for those of you who know me, I may say I am GRC. And so in my own understanding spiritually, I know, I am George Robert Clark, but at the same time, I always like to reference I am, with that, in terms of my own spiritual awakening, to acknowledge the spirit that I am versus just the man that I am. I don't know if that resonates a little bit, but does that have any significance in terms of the power of our names with the I am?
It does have significance. And in addressing that, let me say this. You thought that your mind came up with the name International Ambassadors Ministry, I am. It didn't. That was given from the light itself. The universe influenced that choice. And in doing so, it opened up doors for the strength to do what you knew you needed to do. And that is to disconnect from religion and move into a place of spirituality. The whole concept of I am, the whole concept of I am reflects the essence of who we are created to be. If Yahweh told Moses to tell them that I am sent you, then the same thing is being said to us. And that was spoken to you when you set up I Am International Ambassadors Ministry mission. That was you. That was being shown to you. And now you've had a serendipitous experience. You thought it was going to be one thing, but the Creator intended for it to be something totally different, with a greater power and a deeper experience than you ever dreamed that it could be. Does that make sense, George?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does, Pastor.
And that happens to us so many times, that we think that we've thought of something, And actually, it was given to us by the universe, or we were guided in that direction by the universe. Their great new faith, there's an increase of trust in our Creator. Foundation of faith. Our faith is foundational to everything else that we believe and the direction that in which we travel. Those kinds of things. Those are the experiences that we've had, not knowing at the beginning what direction they were going to carry us in. So when again, names are extremely important. And in a moment, I am indeed going to speak to the idea of Jacob and Israel. Okay? However, I would like to see if there are others who have comments about what is being said, or have questions about what is being said.
Good morning, Pastor. This is Jackie. So I was just listening about the names, and if I heard you correctly, it was maybe some influence by the universe. Well, you know how my parents named the three of us, John, Bobby, and Jackie. And you know, she was carrying John when President Kennedy was assassinated in '63, and then that next May, she knew that she was going to name him John Fitzgerald. I'm just trying to make the connection there.
I can't.
Are you
Jackie,
saying?
I'm sorry. I
just want to make sure. Am I hearing you correctly, or was that something totally different?
No, it's not something totally different.
Okay.
I see. That's what I mean by arbitrarily, Jackie. To name him John Fitzgerald, if you were to look, find out what those two names mean, especially John, right? You'd be shocked to see how much of that meaning it was shown in his character. I am saying that we are guided by the universe, whether we like it or not. And 9 times out of 10, the mistakes that we make, or the things that we call mistakes, are made because we have ignored the voice of the universe, or the voice of our Creator speaking to us and guiding us in a direction. When I was born, my mama wanted to name me Walter after her daddy. And my aunt said, I think James fits him. Now, I'm just out of the womb and this discussion is going on. Of course, I didn't hear it. I was informed of the discussion. And she ended up naming me James Walter. And when I look at the name James, it speaks to Jacob the supplanter. And I'm going to get into that in a few moments when we talk about Jacob and Israel. So Jackie, you see where I'm coming from when we think we're doing things arbitrarily, but we really aren't. There are other influences in play.
Yeah, I do. Thank you.
And my Obote Nkrumah was my name given by an African priest when I was in college. And though that was for a reason also. And then another African priest, Father Seen, because I was born on Saturday, that was part of my name also. So anyway, let me say this, then I'm going to see if there's anyone else want to add something. Regardless of whether you change your name after you get older or you maintain that name, it is still influenced by the universe, okay? And that is without regard to whether or not you're spiritual or whatever. So are there any questions or comments? Okay, let's look at Jacob, Jacob's name in Genesis 32 and 24. In Genesis 32 and 24, reading from the New American Standard. Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until day. And when he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he touched the socket of his thigh. So the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated while he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But he said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." And he said, "Your name shall be no longer Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Now, that's what I want to talk about for a few moments. I think that's speaking more to us than we have ever realized. And I don't believe that we are in any way any different than what was happening at that point with Jacob. What I mean by that is this. Jacob was wrestling with himself. When it speaks of the angel that was translated as man in New American Standard, he's talking about the messages, the message that Jacob had been taught from his father, the messages that Jacob had taught over internally about his own spirituality, about his own spiritual journey. And at the time that this took place, it speaks of Jacob having laid down for the night, and he used a rock for his pillow. That speaks to Jacob's struggles, internal struggles, to understand himself in regards to his spiritual nature. He put him in a hard place. And the reason it put him in a hard place is because Jacob was reckoning with his mind as opposed to flowing with his soul. And the wrestling that took place was trying to reconcile what he had been taught and what he had learned from others along the way, trying to reconcile that with what was in him. And at that point, Jacob was in a dark place. He had, according to the Jewish history, Jacob had never left the confines of his community before. And what put him in a dark place was that he had left behind his sense of protection, and he was struggling with who he could trust, and even could he trust himself. Now, Jacob had, during this battle, understood that what his name meant, the supplanter. Supplanter speaks to the idea of someone who actually bamboozles you in order to get what they want. And Jacob had gotten the birthright from Esau by duping Esau. And now, and that was reflective in his character. He was struggling with that. However, during this struggle, Jacob saw that he could not travel this journey alone. And when he got to a place where he would begin to have interludes with light, with understanding of wisdom, and with trying to reconcile that wisdom with what he had been taught. That's when it talks about he was moving, the night was moving towards the dawn. He was beginning to see. And that message that he was wrestling with, said to him, I must go now, meaning that you can embrace this or not. And Jacob said no, he embraced it. And what happened when he embraced it? He embraced it and held on to it, and he had a shift. He had a name change, a character change. No longer was he the one who would receive by duping others. Now his name was Israel, which means his character was changed from what it was to who he was supposed to be, one who rules or one who sets boundaries, as does Elohim. So it's at this juncture, at this point, that Jacob was made to realize that he is Elohim. And the whole concept of the ascendant and descendant is that Jacob's thoughts were leaving him, his desires were leaving him in search of a clearer understanding. And that speaks to the descendant, the messages that were being sent to him or that he was being received. So, so what I'm saying in essence is this, Jacob's character was changed. So what does that have to do with us? Our characters have been influenced or totally changed. You will not, in the midst of those on a journey for truth, and they have no influence on you. And that influence on you is an awakening of who you are to be, as opposed to who you have been told you are. And you have to make a decision. The decision to become who you have been shown that you are. And in doing so, be prepared to deal with the struggles that you will encounter along that journey. Or you can remain or who you have been told you were, knowing that you have been influenced differently, and travel the same journey that you did before you were influenced. Once you embrace it, that is when the change comes. Once you embrace it, you are one who has chosen to travel a journey in search of truth. And when you embrace it, now you realize that you are not the person that you were told that you were. You are not the person that you had grown to believe you were. You are now becoming the person who you were created to be. And that is Elohim having a human experience. Elohim in this material world. Elohim in this material world, seeking to set boundaries for this material world.
Sage, you're on mute.
Okay. A source of balance, a source of growth for other people who are in your sphere. The source of environmental change when you embrace the reality of who you were created to be. This in itself is speaking to, this in itself is showing us what transpired when Jacob had this encounter. Therefore, this is not speaking about an individual man. This is speaking about an aspect of our lives that has that gives us the opportunity to travel from a place of confusion towards a place of order. Travel from a place of delusion to a place of reality. And that reality is reflected in the journey that Jacob took from this point forward, with his character being that of Israel. And if you read the scriptures, you will see there is a difference when Jacob is referred to as Jacob and he is referred to as Israel from this point forward. Materially is Israel, materially it is Jacob, and spiritually it is Israel. So the aspects of his life are described by the name that is used during the journey of his life, just as ours are also. When we sit and feel like we got to get even with someone, or that we have to put somebody down or belittle them, then we are the person that we were told we were, as opposed to who we were created to be. When we recognize the thoughts that we have are not conducive to spiritual growth, we repent from that and we disconnect ourselves from that sin, and we move forward by seeking to avoid that mistake in the future. And we get to the place where we talk to ourselves about who we are, and we get to the place where no longer do we have to have that reminder, that limp that came as a result of the socket being touched, that we no longer have to have that limp to remind us of who we are. The limp is representative of the times when we sit down and like, why is it that I have to go through this? That limp reminds us of who we are and where the starting point in our lives of embracing the reality of who we were created to be. So in every life, regardless of what we go through, we come to a place of a reminder of who we are, either by our soul speaking to us internally, or by those around us saying things like, don't forget who you are. This is the limp that's reminding us. Does that make sense to you, or there questions are coming?
It makes a lot of sense, Pastor. But I want to ask you something about the angel saying, Jacob saying, I won't let you go until you bless me.
Yes.
So when we let go of all of our fears and anything that's going to hold us back from becoming the full potential of being Elohim, then that's when our nature change. When we let go all of this mess that we hold on to, the baggage, I'll say. Is that the same as Jacob saying, I won't let you go until you bless me? Am I saying that right?
Yes. Jacob is saying, I will not let you go until I get a clearer real understanding of who I am. In other words, if you want to know who you are, it's not going to come by you saying, I want to know who I am. Or it's not going to come because you are doing an academic study on the scriptures. It's not going to come because you want to project yourself as being something special and beyond everyone else. It comes through struggle. It comes through you having to recognize what's in you, who you have been and are at that moment. Those things that we have held on to that causes us to look at people differently. Those things that we have in our lives that causes us to think that we are superior to anyone. All of these things we must deal with. George gave an example of leaving the United Methodist Church and how family is still there. that in itself, it was a struggle. Why? Because all that George knew in terms of religion, or what we call spirituality, was the doctrine of the United Methodist Church and its methods of translating the scriptures. Now, the choice comes where you are out there all alone, believing what you know the truth to be, and you are being held internally by what you have been taught, and you don't know whether to walk away or not. Now, there may be those who think that differently than that, but I know for everyone else, I know there was a struggle to release from the doctrines that we have been taught. And not only that, but once you are released from the doctrines and you begin to travel the spiritual journey, those concepts are still in you. And there is a constant battle to move beyond them. And not only that, your everyday life is filled with those ideals that you have learned during your travels on earth, period. Whether it be ideas from the church or whether it be ideas from other sources, they remain with you. And the struggle is to make sure that we purge ourselves of any of those things and opening ourselves up by virtue of saying to our Creator, I no longer know what to do with the free will. I release it. I relinquish my free will. My total desire is to embrace the reality of who I am. Now, as far as I am concerned, when I did that, I had no clue as to who I was, but I did know that I wanted to know. And regardless of what I had to go through to get there, I was willing to do it. And the first thing that happened is that I started seeing the scriptures differently because of my research. And then the next thing that happened is the people around me making an attempt to control me by distancing themselves from me or trying things like giving me greater opportunities to pull me back into the circle. After I got to the place where I knew that that was not going to happen and separated myself from that segment of religion, things did not get easier. They got more difficult. And the difficulty of those things was now I was no longer the clerk of the association. I was no longer the chairman of the education committee. I was no longer in line to be the president of a convention or the Sunday school convention. All these things were gone. And I felt nothing about losing or walking away from those things. It was the camaraderie that was the hardest part. And I realized that the camaraderie was on my part, not theirs. Control was coming from them. And then I had to get rid of, I had to deal with those things that I had been inundated with that was outside of religion. And one of them was understanding that I was, my feelings, my emotions were wrong when it came to white people. I had to do a deep dive on me and my emotions in regards to white people. And that was very difficult because of the experiences that not I had, but also the experiences that I was very much aware of that other people had endured. That and dealing with that and reconciling that with the journey that I was on, I had no clue that releasing from religion and releasing from all of these secular things was necessary in order for me to transform the religious thought into spiritual understanding and to transform this anger, this rage that I had towards white people for what had transpired against them, transforming it into love for mankind. And when I was able to travel that journey, what I actually began to see was without white people, without other people in this earth, there would be no reconciliation. So like Jacob, I embraced who I was shown to be, as opposed to trying to hang on to who I was told I was. And as a result of that, I am who I am now. I am where I am on this journey. And there is nothing to go back to, because once I realized that they were mechanisms of manipulation and control, I left them behind me, and they no longer exist in my life. And I don't intend to be talking about me, but I don't know about you. I can only give you an example of me because I know my journey, not yours. So I'm hoping that the explanation of this journey that I have traveled and still travel would be and will help you to understand your journey and see the story that we are reading here about Jacob, the allegory that we are presented with, in order for us to understand what a transitional journey looks like. Does that make sense? Questions or comments?
I have a comment. I just wanted to add to what you were saying. But the way I see it in terms of this thing with Jacob is that he was in a meditative state. And I think the daybreak, I think we've talked about this before, how the daybreak represented him on the cusp of being enlightened and realizing that he's Elohim. And the struggle, but he had the struggle of his intellect versus what he was about to experience spiritually. So he wanted to continue in that enlightenment, and he didn't want to let go until he made that breakthrough to realize who he was. And then when the angel or the whoever, the spiritual experience, he thought about, what is your name? Really thinking about who are you? And coming to the realization of who he really was, meaning Elohim. And I found the interesting thing was down in verse, where is that? Verse 30, it says, so Jacob named the place Peniel, for he said, I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been preserved. I think that's interesting that it's nearly the same word as the pineal gland, which is where we really see things. So I think he came to that enlightenment. He came to that realization that he is Elohim. I have seen God, and God is me. So, and then it says the sun rose. Now the sun rose upon him just as he crossed over wherever he was going. So the sun rose on him, meaning the actual realization was set in his soul, was placed in his soul, so that he really now believed it after this meditative experience. So he came to truly know that he was Elohim. And I think the limp was a reminder of what he now possessed and that it's going to be hard to go back to whatever you came from or whatever you were before. It's a reminder not to go back. And I think for us, we all can come to that meditative state in terms of understanding and realizing who we are as Elohim. And once we do realize who we are, that is our name change. Because when we realize that we are Elohim, I'm not just Audrey, I'm Elohim, that is my name change. And once you really fully realize that, there's no real going back from that. It's almost impossible to go back from that. When you have a true realization of it. So anyway, just to sum it all up, I guess I'm saying, I think he was having in a meditative state, having a spiritual experience of the realization of who he really was, and that any of us can have that same experience, either through meditation, prayer, whatever we call it. We can come to that point ourselves and realize that we also are Elohim.
I agree wholeheartedly with that, Audrey. Even in addition to what you were saying, Jacob said, oh, it's the messenger, as is written in the scripture, said, if dawn is breaking, let me go. And Jacob said, I will not let you go, which means that Jacob had made up his mind that he was going to hold on to what he had been shown, regardless of what he had to go through. Mm-hmm. So I think that's very significant as well. And
I agree.
That's what we are talking about all the time, how committed we must be. And being committed, you don't know whether you're committed to anything until other things that are pleasurable, other things that are desirable present themselves to you. And now you have to make a choice between what you know the truth to be and what you know you should be doing, as opposed to what's being offered to you that looks appealing, that feels good to you.
Yeah, the one thing I neglected to say is that when Jacob said, I won't let you go, I won't stop. I think what he's saying is, I won't stop seeking until I find what it is I'm seeking. And the finding is the blessing.
Yes. Yes.
So that's the blessing.
Right. There is nothing greater that we can ever receive than an acknowledgement or the strength and understanding to acknowledge who we are. Once we embrace that, everything changes in our lives. Literally, everything changes. Until, go ahead, Myra.
I was going to say, Ms. Audrey, Pastor, Ms. Audrey, thank you for explaining the part about the breaking of dawn, because I was about to ask that question. As soon as I did, you provide clarity, because I'm like, I know this is an allegory, but I'm like, if you're in the middle of a fight, why would somebody look up and say, oh, it's the breaking of dawn? What was the significance of that? It's in the Bible. Why was that important? I just want to thank you guys for bringing that out. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. We have talked about the commitment. We cannot expect to change the mindset of humanity for the purpose of balance and harmony until we are able to do and be as Jacob was. There is nothing that I would put beyond the opportunity to see who I am. Now, once he embraced rather who he was created to be, that's when, I think, what verse was that? Where he said, I have seen God face to face. What is he saying?
Verse 30.
Okay, thanks. When he says that, I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been preserved. What he's saying is, I have seen myself. I have seen who I am, and that is the preservation of my life. That preserves who I am. That is very, very not only significant, but powerful. I've looked in the mirror and seen me. I looked in the mirror and I saw Elohim, and Elohim is me, and I am Elohim. That is the preservation of my life. What does that mean? That means that without regard to anything that I go through, I am vested with the equipment to get me through it in a balanced way. I am empowered, not so much to rise above the inequities, but to change them. Not to run away from the dysfunctionality of religion, but to understand it so it can be transformed for the benefit of those who have been entrapped by it. And every bit of this goes back to how committed we are. Has nothing to do with money, has absolutely nothing to do with education, has nothing to do with who you know, the networking, nothing at all. It has everything to do with you looking in the mirror and acknowledging who you are, not based upon conjecture, not based upon what someone has told you, but what you believe in the depths of your soul. Any questions or comments about that? Let me add one more thing, and if there's not questions, I'm done. Regardless of what you're going through, you are built for that. You have been empowered to handle it. Whatever the it is. If you were not empowered to handle it, if you were not built for this moment, it will not happen to you. These things that come into our lives, that present themselves and introduce themselves as adversities, as burdens, or opportunities for us to be reminded that we were preserved, we were brought into this earth for this moment. And believe you me, we can handle it. As long as we don't throw a pity party or cast doubt on whether or not the Creator's with us. Because quite frankly, if you truly believe that you're Elohim, Elohim is you, it is impossible for our Creator not to be with us. It is impossible for Yahweh Elohim to be separate from us. Impossible. We are deliverers. We are messianic. We are not a labeled religion. We are a force of labor for the purpose of freeing people from religion. This is our hour to show the world itself, to show every entity in this world that light brings order to disorder, and that regardless of how much turmoil you are experiencing internally, that turmoil can be transformed into joy based upon what we know the truth to be. Trouble doesn't last always. Trouble only lasts as long as you allow it to last. The changing or the ending of trouble does not come necessarily with circumstances changing. It comes with your mindset changing. And when your mindset changes, that's when circumstances change. We are a force to be reckoned with, but not a force to be defeated. The status quo is being presented to us as a thing that cannot be changed. That is not true. Humanity and its survival is on our shoulders. Any questions or comments? If there are no questions or comments, I thank you for your time. I thank you for your input. I thank you for the energy that you provide for us to be able to see beyond the curtain, for us to be able to move beyond the place of the altar and see what enlightenment truly is. And my wishes are for you to enjoy the remainder of your day. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 6 o'clock. Be well and have a great day.
Great, thank you, you too.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you so much. This was
You,
wonderful.
everybody.
Thank you, Pastor. Thank you, everyone.
You're welcome.